Hi, it's Wanda from Alanda Craft, and today I'm going to show you how to bind a quilt. Okay, you can see here it finishes your quilts off beautifully, gives them a lovely finish and just gets all those edges nice and neat. So let's get started. Now what I'm going to do is bind this quilt here. You can see that we've got raw edges, so we can't leave our quilt looking like that. So I have some strips of fabric here. They're 2.5 inches. I've got 5 of them for this particular quilt. It's only a baby quilt. So let's get on and show you what we need to do. So now the first thing we have to do is sew all our strips together. Now we're going to do that with using a 45-degree angle, simply to reduce the bulk of the material and to add some strength. So I have my first strip here and it's face side up, and I'm going to put my second strip face side down and overlap them because we want to leave enough material to get a 1/4 inch seam in there. So if you are a seasoned sewer, you'll just pop off to the machine now and sew that across from edge corner to corner. But if you are a beginner or you just want to take a little bit more time to get some confidence, find your little ruler and get the 45-degree angle and just place that against the edge of the strip that's facing towards you. And then you can just draw a line between those two points there. Okay. And you might even want to pop a pin in there. So when you open that, once you've sewn it and you open it, your material is going to be lying in a nice long strip with your seam here. And we're going to do that with all of the strips. So now I'm going to go and sew that, and then I'll come back and show you what I've done. So now I'm just going to sew across there from that point to that point. And that's what your seam is going to look like when you've sewn it. Okay, so once we've got our bits sewn together, you'll see that when you lay them down, you've got all this bulk here. So what we need to do is to trim that. So we're going to take off about 1/4 inch, or take it back to 1/4 inch. We've got these little triangle bits that we need to straighten up, so we just cut them in line with our piece of fabric, with our strip, one at each end. And there we go. So that's nice and ready to go. And we'll just iron our seams down after. So I've sewn all my strips together and I've trimmed them, and now I'm just going to iron the seams flat. So I just take my iron, just do them one way, don't need to open them. So you're going to do that with each of the pieces that you've cut off. And our next step is to fold this in half and press it all the way down. Okay, so just folding it in half, give it a good press, a nice crisp edge, and you're going to do that for the full length of the strip. So I'll continue to do that, and you'll do the same. Now once you've got your strips all joined together, you just want to lay your quilt out on the floor or on a table and run the strip piece around the edge just to make sure that you've got enough. Okay, so that's your first step. Now then, if you're going to be hand binding this quilt, you'll want to sew your binding to the front of the quilt. So you'll attach it to the front, and then when you turn it over, you'll do your hand stitching on the back. But we're going to be machine stitching this binding on, so we're going to attach our binding to the back of the quilt, and then we'll fold it over to the front. And by doing that, we can actually see what the stitching is going to look like, because we want the front to look really great. We don't mind as much about the stitching going a little bit awry on the back. So just remember that. If you're machine stitching, sew it to the back, bring it over to the front, and then do your top stitch on the front. Okay, so now we're going to pin our binding to our quilt. We start about halfway down on one of the long sides. We're going to leave a tail here of about 4 to 5 inches that we're not going to sew, and we're going to just pin all the way down to the corner here. So I'll just put a couple of pins in here now. Now we're going to stop when we're sewing 1/4 inch from the edge. Now if you're an experienced sewer, you can just eyeball that 1/4 inch, but if you're not, if you're a beginner, you might just want to take your ruler and measure 1/4 inch in and draw yourself a line. just along there, just so you can see it. Okay, and you can pin it down to that point. Now just make sure now that you don't have any seams from the binding on that corner. If you do, just unpin and readjust the binding up or down so that it doesn't have any of these seams on the corners. So now I've sewn my 1/4 inch seam down here. You can see I've left my little tail, you know, 4 to 5 inches. I've sewn the 1/4 inch all the way down to the mark that we made, which is 1/4 inch from the edge. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to fold this back so that it's straight. Okay, so it's going to be straight along here, and it's going to just carry on along from our quilt edge. Alright, so they run parallel. Okay, now, so that's straight there. Now we take our binding and we fold it back. Again, we're keeping it straight with the edge and straight with this edge, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch all the way to the other end, where we're going to do the same thing. We're going to stop 1/4 inch from the edge, and we're going to do what we're doing here now. Now you're going to end up with this flap, this little triangle here, and that's going to form our mitre. Okay, so we've sewn our quilt around now, and we've stopped at each of the corners as we've come to them and done our mitres. And now I'm on the last leg, so I've sewn 1/4 inch down, and I've left about 6 inches between this point and the end of the tail. So I haven't sewn right down. We want some room to manoeuvre here. Alright, so now my binding is 2.5 inches wide. You will have to leave an overlap of whatever your binding is. So if you've got 2 1/4, you'll need to measure 2 1/4 here. If you've done 3, you'll measure 3. My binding's 2.5. Now I can either measure this with a ruler, 2.5 inches, but a really easy way to do this is to just take your binding and cut a piece off the end, and I've already done that. Open it up and just lay this piece at the beginning of your tail end, and just lay that flat. Now then you bring this binding down and overlap, and what you're going to do is just cut along that edge there. Okay, so I'm now going to cut my piece of material straight across there. Don't throw away anything that you have left over. Put it in your jelly rolls stash, because you can use that to make a scarf or something else. Okay, so now we've been brave enough to cut our piece of binding off. We need to join the two pieces together. So I'm going to just take the top piece. Now when I talk about the top piece, I'm talking about the last piece I was sewing on. And I'm just going to lay that face up, and this is the tail of where we started. I'm going to make that, I'm going to bring that and lay it on top. Now just bunch your quilt up a bit, and you'll notice here that I have a selvage piece. Well, we don't want that, so you make sure that you cut all your selvages off. I forgot to do that. We're going to overlap those two just slightly. You don't want to take too much, because we've measured it now so that it should fit exactly. I'm just going to pin that, and what we're going to do is finish it like the others. So we're going to sew from here up to here. So I'll go and do that now. Okay, so I've sewn my seam line, done my diagonal, and now I've just checked my binding and make sure it fits. Now it should fit exactly with the way that we've done it. So I need to trim this piece here now down to 1/4 inch. Okay, and any little tags that are sticking out. Right, and now what I'll do is I'm just going to go and finish that off, sew down here, and that's the back part of my quilt finished. I'll do that and I'll come back and show you what to do next. Okay, so I've sewn that down, and I've used a back stitch where I started and stopped, so just to keep it in place. So that's all done. So the next step is to take our binding from the back and fold it over the front, and make sure we cover that stitch line that we've got there. So we'll bring it over and just start pinning it in place. So we need to pin it all the way around and tidy up our mitres as we go. Alright, so I'm pinning my quilt, pinning my binding. Now I've come to my corner, so I just want to hold that flat and then fold the other side over, and I just want to form a mitre. I don't want to do this. I don't want to just, make it look squared off. You want it to look nice and neat, because this is the front of your quilt. So we'll do that till we get a perfect mitre. Okay, so I've pinned my quilt, pinned my binding, and now we're going to go and sew it. Now I like to pin, you may not want to pin, it's entirely up to you. But I'm going to sew close to the edge, and then when I get to the corners, we'll just show you what we're going to do there. Okay, so I'm coming to the corner and I've taken my pins out here. I'm just coming up, just slowly on the corners, and leave your needle in a down position and just pivot around. And off we go again. So there's our quilt finished. Our binding's done, and doesn't it look beautiful? It just finishes the quilt, makes it look so lovely. Okay, if you enjoyed this tutorial, please give us a like or a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more quilting tutorials.